You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 190. On today's show, we talk with set designer Vincent Gunn about tracking the hours that you work. We discuss valuing your time, investing the money in your retirement account, writing things down and getting them out of your head, designers thinking about work even when they're not at work, and funding currently being revoked and rescinded by the National Endowment for the Arts, which, as of the day I'm releasing this episode, that is totaling over $27 million in revoked funds. Find links to everything we discuss in the show notes or at artisticfinance.com/190. Before we start, I want to mention our sister podcast, Light Talk. Now, it's only a sister podcast because I have a great relationship with the hosts. Almost all of their hosts have been guests on this show, and a lot of our guests have been guests over on their show. There's no real official affiliation, and I'm not exactly sure that they know we even exist. But anyway, for longtime listeners, you might know this show as the one that I'm always trying to overtake in number of Apple podcast reviews, but without letting them know that I'm trying to overtake them. Speaking of that, if you can pause this show and take a minute, I would love if you would go rate and review Artistic Finance on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Now, one of our patrons, Dennis Size, has joined Light Talk as their new host. His first episode there was Saturday, and it's a great listen. Not only is he very entertaining, but he's bringing an entirely new perspective to the show. He's their first non-academic host. And I do just have to say that Dennis was a guest of our show when we were only a few months old, and then he was a guest again when I took some time off to become a dad. I'm so grateful to Dennis for his participation with Artistic Finance, both as a guest and a co-host, but also a Patreon patron. And so I want to give him a big congratulations on joining Light Talk, and I wish him the best. Now, I don't wish him more Apple Podcast reviews. I still do hope that we can have more of those. But other than that, I'm wishing him the best. All right. Thank you for letting me take that little podcasting tangent. Now, without further ado, let's get to the show.
You are listening to Artistic Finance, where we help creatives learn about the business of show business.
Welcome and thank you for listening. I am your host, Ethan Steimel. We are recording this May 9th, 2025. And the news is on Broadway, Redwood is closing early presumably because it didn't get any Tony nominations for anything at all. And so may it rest in peace. Good show. Even though I thought the set was quite beautiful. I didn't see the show, but I was like, wow, this is sort of impressive. But anyway, tariff wars are going on in the United States. That's just an ongoing thing right now. And then this week, an all-American Pope was elected, which just makes me think of like Book of Mormon. It's like, we got an American Pope, baby. And today I welcome set designer Vincent Gunn to the show. Welcome, Vincent.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And then one other thing that's going on right now, and even today, is that the National Endowment of the Arts is getting its funding slashed like crazy. And somebody posted on LinkedIn, and I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes, but somebody created a Google Doc that is updating every single organization that has had a grant or some sort of thing cut. And right now, I don't know what the numbers of it is, but it's like hundreds of organizations.
Wild.
It's wild. And so far right now, the counter has $14 million has been cut. And that sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of the budget, that is so little. And what is laughable about this whole thing, it's not a laughing matter because it's crazy to take away this funding, but most of these are like 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. They're all tiny amounts, which to me is funny because it's like, that's the amount of money you're getting from the federal government for arts in America.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like there's no funding at all.
Which there sort of is when you think about some of the other countries that like really subsidize the arts.
Yeah. And I looked through the list. The biggest one I saw was $500,000 was cut from something in St. Paul, Minnesota called Forecast Public Art. And that's a lot of money. But the next biggest one I saw was $150,000, which was the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. It's just like $150,000. Yes, it's a lot, but in the grand scheme of the budget and how much money it takes to operate these things, it's like that's nothing. I looked up that in 2023, the arts funding in the United States, the National Endowment of the Arts, was $203 million. And that sounds like a lot, right? Because $14 million of it has been cut so far. But $203 million is 0.003% of the United States' entire budget, which is $6.75 trillion. So, and it's this, I don't think this is necessarily Doge doing this. I think it's just,
Who knows?
does it really matter? But it's like, so we're focusing on this 0.003% of funding. It seems like it's not about money. It seems like
About them being able to say they saved these little bits of money.
I mean, it's just so tiny.
And
just so tiny.
That they can say that they're like working against places with DEI initiatives.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I remember my sister was in the Navy at one point and we were visiting her and she said, oh yeah, there's this super secret plane going on or something. And I said, oh yeah. And I bet it costs like 500 million or something. And she said, well, try that with a B, like billion. And so it's just like, it's just crazy. It's like if you build one less plane, the current 203 million funding that we have each year for the arts, that could go on for 700 years, something.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
But anyway, Vincent, enough about that. Let's forget that for a little bit. We'll return to that after this.
In our nightmares.
First things first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a New Jersey-based set designer. Probably like 75% of the work I do now is in educational venues, whether that's high schools or youth theaters. And the other 25 is things in the city, things at summer stocks in various states. I'm 29. I'm a white man.
Well, I'm glad you said 29 because I feel like you're actually one of the younger people we've had on the show.
Yes, I feel that way too, which I think is exciting. And I think it's an interesting demographic that the show could feature.
I totally agree. And I was listening to, so Corey Paddock has relaunched his In One, the podcast, where he talks with Broadway designers. And it's a very specific, it's like he only talks to Broadway designers. And his most recent episode with Asia Jackson, he said, oh yeah, people tell me I should talk to younger people, but I'm like, no. And I totally get what he's saying, but I want to be like, but there's a whole perspective there of like, and I totally get wanting to talk to people that have experience, have been in rooms, have done a certain amount of work. It is definitely like what we care about and what we're sort of like working toward a little bit. But specifically for our show, we're, talking about like, how do you do the day to day? To me, it's very important to be like, how are we doing it right now?
And for every person working on Broadway, there's how many people not.
Yeah, exactly. Vincent, what is a live event that you like to experience as an audience member?
I'm definitely a musical theater person. Seeing a new musical or one that I haven't seen before, I think is always really exciting. And seeing one done in a way I haven't seen it done before. And like, I think every time I go to any theatrical event, I chase like the first time I saw Sweeney Todd and just like how amazing and shocking and thrilling it all was. That's sort of like the feeling I want when I go to any piece of theater. I like plays as well, but musicals are definitely my main live event that I consume.
I love that. I know I always feel not bad, but guilty a little bit because I'm like, I like musicals because they just entertain me more and I don't have to think as much. And so it's like, it's not that I don't like plays. I do. It's just that my brain power is required more.
And I feel like it's almost easier to get information about musicals, whereas I feel like you have to dig a little bit more if you want to like be like, will I like this play?
Yeah, because chances are you won't. And you also have to sit through. Although that being said, when I was younger and I just wanted to laugh, like I wanted tap dancing, I wanted to laugh. Like if it was a play, it had to be a comedy. I still subscribe to that, but I actually go to a lot of plays now, and even if it's dark, depressing about, the Holocaust or very serious matters, maybe it's me maturing, but there are very few plays I don't like because there's just so much to it. It's like I can focus on the acting or the design or the storytelling, or because I'm never in love with everything. So I always like gravitate to the things I do like, and then I always walk out usually like super happy that I went.
People working in theater should have the ability to enjoy things even if you don't necessarily enjoy the whole work. Like being able to look at it and be like, this thing is done really well, even if I don't necessarily like everything you're doing. So I have a similar experience where it's like I rarely go to something and walk out and just be like, I didn't like that at all.
Yeah. What show on Broadway do you want to see right now?
I am eager to see Just in Time, just partially because that's like one of the further out on my calendar. I've seen a lot of things that are currently open, but Just in Time is one that I sort of wasn't expecting to be interested in, but the word of mouth I've heard about it has made me excited to see it.
And does that have anything to do with the set, or is it just you want to see the show?
Oh, it's definitely partially involving the set. Immersive stuff is exciting. Some of Alex Timber's work directorially and like in spaces has been really cool. I'm excited to see how that applies here.
All right. Are you good, bad, or neutral with money?
I want to say like neutral good. I am trying really hard to work towards good, and listening to your podcast is one of the things in my head that makes me closer to good. I started like bulk of my life not having much conception of money. It's definitely been like a learning curve there. I never had like exorbitant spending habits or things that I consider real, like I wouldn't want to be doing. But I also am not necessarily the most knowledgeable on everything. And even when I have some knowledge, I don't necessarily like fully feel like I understand it. So that's why I'm saying neutral good, if that makes sense.
Yeah, somebody asked me about mortgages and they were like, I don't understand mortgages. And I was like, well, you don't need to know. Like, there's no reason to know unless you're going to take one out. And then at that point, I mean, it's good to like look it up, a year or two ahead of time if you're thinking that's in your future.
Yeah.
And sort of see like, well, what do I need? And it's like, it really just boils down to you have to find somebody to lend you the money and they will tell you what they need from you.
Totally. Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned a little bit that you didn't necessarily always have a concept of this, but in your life growing up, have you had a good financial example?
Yes. My dad is a CPA and he's in IT audit consulting. So he's always had that sort of like business financial mind. And he would at one point have said that he's fiscally conservative. I think he's dropped that term though in recent years. But
it doesn't mean what it used to.
Right, exactly. But being a general sort of like frugality when approaching life. My mom's always been good with money too, but she's just a pediatrician and not working in business. So I definitely always had that really good example. And I think that's probably why I don't have poor spending habits and like credit card debt and things like that because of the good example I had.
That's amazing. So at the start of your career, and maybe let us know when you graduate, or like how long you've been out of college.
I graduated in 2018.
Okay. So it's been 6 years?
Yeah.
7 years?
Something like that.
Okay, cool. And what did your finances look like at that point?
Yeah. So when I graduated, I still had way less conception of money than I should, even though like I had been like working summers and stuff. Remember the first year after I graduated when I'd like finally like worked lots of places. My dad, like when tax season came, was sort of like, well, do you have all these things? And I'm like, what tracking are you talking about? That year I made like $16,000. Like, it was pretty small. And I was like working constantly. And to be fair, 3 months of that was doing an unpaid internship at Williamstown. But I was doing a lot of like small New York theater, and that's sort of where that first year ended up. Like, I designed 6 shows, I think, and I assisted on 5. I did a lot of painting work in between. I'm very fortunate that I am still living with my parents in New Jersey, which made my early career very, it made it an easier transition than for some who are living somewhere not with their parents. Yeah.
That's a really good point, because I think people understand it. Because I grew up in Missouri, right? So if you want to work on Broadway, right, it's much easier to be closer to that geographic area.
Yeah, definitely.
I would say there's probably a lot of people listening that understand that you look at certain people's careers on Broadway, and it's always hard. Like, no matter what, even if you come from all the privilege, well, unless you have like a ton of money, you can just produce what you want and then hire yourself. Okay, that's
Totally.
that's not unheard of.
I'm looking for friends like that.
Yeah, but even like, say, the some of the biggest designer names out there, you look into their lives and you learn that, oh, they lived in that geographic area where they could stay at home, or they could start in middle school or high school, going in and starting meeting these people or working in these locations. And it just ties into privilege. And while that's not necessarily one that's like you're from a wealthy background or something, but being in that geographic area is like a part of that privilege that you have to sort of work on Broadway, or in New York at least.
Definitely.
So I'm just glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, and like being able to do unpaid internships, or if it's Williamstown, paying for food and housing while there. So I think that sort of privilege I've been very fortunate to have throughout my life and early career.
All right. So now, do you think or worry about money on a daily basis?
I would say I think about it. I wouldn't say I worry about it. I have various methods of tracking my hours and my income, and I definitely consult those. Definitely, at least my hour tracking, I consult daily, and if not multiple times a day, where I sort of keep track of every hour that I work for every show. And then I add that up daily, and I add it up weekly.
I feel like this is a good time to introduce your spreadsheet tracker. or like what you're describing here about tracking all these things. Because I should actually say that we met on LinkedIn, and you reached out. I can't quite remember how it started, but it was something about like, I'm going to share my tracker, or this is how I track, or
I think the very first thing was when you were promoting LinkedIn. And I was like, okay, well, now I'm going to talk to you on LinkedIn.
I mean, actually, okay, that's a side note. So we did an episode on should people in the arts be on LinkedIn. And by the way, still today, it's like 4 years later, there are so many arts people I know that are not on LinkedIn. And I'll never begrudge anybody for not joining a social media. Totally, stay away. But there's so many people that say, I don't need it, I don't need it. And that's true, but also like everyone's on it, including the arts people. And there are so many arts people on. Because of that episode, I've had like more than 10 people tell me that they joined because of that episode. So anyway, so I'm just going to let you talk us through this tracking, because I just turned 37 this week, and I do not track things like you. You would think, like, because I talk about this stuff on the show a lot, that I'm organized like this, but I am not. So this is totally crazy and foreign to me.
So this is my note. And I think in our various communication over the past months, we had suggested making this note into a more transferable spreadsheet. And I would still love to do that. But I realized my Excel skills do not match the abilities that I want in this chart. But if anyone out there has Excel knowledge and wants to help me with this project, I would love that.
I'm actually going to say, I'm just interject here and say that you've started a spreadsheet. I'm fairly good with spreadsheets, so I'm going to clean it up and get it into a workable version, and I will share it in the link in the show notes.
There we go. There's the teamwork we need. So this is basically just a note in my phone, but I have it by the day, and then in each, like next each day, I have hours divided by show, and I write abbreviated names. So like Room is Rumors, Joseph is Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. MCM is the Musical Comedy Murders. Cell is Celebrate. So it has each show, and then I add it up for the day, and then I add it up for the week. And I find the week adding up very helpful, just because in your head you sort of have that a normal person should be working 40 hours a week. And if I look at a week where I'm like, oh, I worked 12 hours on Tuesday and 9 hours on Monday and 13 hours on Wednesday, like maybe it's okay if like the next week on Tuesday, I only work 4 hours because I didn't take a weekend the last week. And I think having that sort of knowledge is not acceptable. I think it's really helpful in making sure I don't completely burn myself out. And sometimes I do, but I think it's helpful in sort of giving myself some boundaries. And what I think it's really awesome for is I can do Apple S and sort of like search through the document and like type in the show code. And at the end of every show, I'm going to switch to this spreadsheet. Not every show, but the shows I care about. I like enter all the hours that I worked, and then I total up the hours. And then I can say like, I made $32.75 per hour on the show.
And is that first one you showed us, that's just a note in Apple, like on your laptop? I don't use notes.
Yes, it's like an app on my iPhone, and on my Mac. So it like automatically updates each other.
And it's just the Notes app that comes installed. Nothing more than that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nothing special to that one.
Okay, so sorry. So now this is a spreadsheet titled Employment.
Yes. So that basically has every employer listed, has every production listed, what I'm making per show, what state the work is in. So like when filing taxes, that is just a helpful key. So like I'll say like I got W-2 or 1099 or like highlighted in red because I haven't found that W-2, but I found it now. I just haven't unhighlighted the red. This page is from last year. Or if it's like somewhere it's a smaller job and there's not a form, but I'm still reporting that income. So that I keep track of it. And that was sort of a product of my first year. Like I have it going back to 2019 of the first year in 2018, I guess, where my dad was like, where did you work? And I was like, I can check my email and try to figure it out. Because I just hadn't written down anything. And especially when I was working more shows where it was like $500 design fees, and people weren't sending 1099s. There just wasn't as much paper trail. And it was like digging through my email and my calendar and trying to piece back together my year in order to do taxes. But now this spreadsheet has grown from there.
Okay. So you keep the notes list just like daily/weekly, where you're like, okay, I did my hours today. Let me just plug that into the notes. Then you go and you plug it into this spreadsheet where it will automatically do the math to total up. So you have a total of like, this is how much I've earned at any given time.
Yep. And then the sort of fun thing I do, so like at the end of the year, and this is clearly, it's just how my brain really works, so that it's not that organized, even though I can talk about it like I'm organized. Where like I have like the total hours I worked this year. And I have like the average, like last year for 2024, I worked an average of 45 hours per week, which came down to an average of $38 an hour. But then I like did another like approximate average where I like subtracted the weeks where I was on vacation, and that came to 47.9 hours per week. And then 36 shows that opened 2024, an average of 65 hours per show, an average of 2,500 per show, and just like details like that I think are useful for your business to know. And then things like by show my totals. So if I'm like asking for more money the next time I'm working for a company, I can be like, oh, I worked 120 hours for you last year and you're only paying me this. So this year, I think it makes more sense if we agree that my fee will be here. Because I think when you're when you tell people the number of hours, sometimes they become more amenable. And I have had it work where they agree to what I'm asking for because of it. So
Yeah. And I think telling the numbers, it's not about like shock value or anything like that. It's what Jen Shriver has talked about in the past, where it's like just showing them the data,
right.
just laying it out. And so that's what you are doing here is you are like making the paper trail.
Yeah.
Because if I were to do this and say, look, I had to work a ton the last time or something, or like this sort of happened and because you didn't have an electrician or something, it ended up making me have to do all this extra work. I'll go on a case by case back and sort of figure out like what did I work. But I mean, I love your organization and then can you show me that first part where you showed like the totals for the year? You're not putting any hours in over here.
No, this doesn't have hours. So the hours are from, this is where you see how low tech I am. This was like, I entered every weekly total in this column, and then I totaled that up into this.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a magical way for this to all work in a real spreadsheet, but I couldn't figure out how to like make the days like, I like the weekly thing, and I think the week thing is the hard part to make a spreadsheet work in my knowledge. But
well, and I see few of your weeks are under 40 hours.
yeah.
Very, very few. But I do love that you track it so that way you know how much over or under you are of the 40 hours, just to compare us to the rest of society.
Right.
Because my wife, she is going to have to work this weekend, and she's like unhappy about it,
Yeah.
because like in what I would call like normal people life, like that's crazy and even I on her side want to be like, can't you tell them like this work just can't happen? Like it's not happening until Monday or whatever, but she knows what she's doing, etc. But it's like, I mean, she works a lot, but this is one of the few times that she's had to work on the weekends in like the past 6 months. Maybe it's the first or second time. So I just see your hours and over 40 every single week. But because we have to track it for ourselves on like, how are we going to self-care? Like, how are we going to not work ourselves to death? And I love that you're just writing it down, which is not that complicated at all.
No, it's very low tech. One of my other things that I've sort of realized, because I'm working so many hours, I need to take more than one like actual vacation a year to be a functional person. When I look at it this way, it's like, oh no, like I deserve this because it's just the way it should be.
Yeah. Well, and can you explain the vacation? Because the way I think of vacation is I think like if you get a job in the real world, usually like 2 weeks of vacation eventually is what is like the base starting point. Or I know they combine like sick days and vacation days now like into just paid time off, generic, whatever. But I would say like 2 weeks at least of like vacation time. So how are you deciding what vacation time should be?
That's a great question. It started 2 years ago, I think, because I ended up having like four-ish weeks of vacation between like April and September. One of them was an unplanned, spontaneous vacation. And then like 2 of them were like started with a wedding and then like visiting friends in that area. And I was like, this is what I should be doing every year. And then like last year was 3, it wasn't 4. And I was like, this just feels like a healthy thing to do in the times when I am not incredibly busy. And I know my most busy season, working mostly in educational theater, will be like October, November, and February, March, just because that's when every high school in the tri-state area has their play and musical mostly. So those weeks, I know I'm going to be having 2 texts per week, bouncing between a different place every other day. Whereas like in the other months, there may be some gaps. And usually just sort of organically, the gaps in my schedule will appear and I'll be like, okay, this is the time. Or like, I know like my mom will take off a week and I'll be like, okay, I'm just going to not book anything for that week. Or like make sure the things I'm building or painting just fall before or after if there's already no text there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think I misunderstood your spreadsheet because so you have column or the thing that's vacation removed. So you're putting in your vacation time as like I took a week, so that many hours went to vacation.
I'm not like giving myself vacation hours. This is more of a like, oh, I worked 5 hours this week because I was on vacation. I worked 16 and a quarter hours because I was on vacation and just like did one day of work on like the end or like a few hours in the evening doing something. Clearly, I'm also bad at taking vacations and not working at all. But that's it's just like marking it out like this week is less because it was a vacation.
I mean, because phones exist, vacation doesn't like everybody works on the vacation. It's not I get so sick of like the billionaires or the really business people who are like, I always work on my vacation. It's like, no, you like having a call with somebody or like saying underlings do the work. That's not real work, buddy.
And like I think because we are in the arts, we are thinking about it even when we're not working. Like my pandemic job was painting murals at the American Dream Mall in New Jersey, which was like this massive mall with like an amusement park and a water park and all these crazy things. But it was like nice going home and just like not thinking about it. And when I wasn't there, I didn't have to think about it. But yet the call to like be doing theatrical design cannot like escape my brain.
Well, that's one of those things where, because I went to a union meeting, so I relocated to St. Louis, and I was like, oh, I'm going to meet the union people here. I went to the USA 829 union meeting. I think there was like 6 people there, maybe 8 people there. But I was there was one other designer. I was the only designer. And the other people are like stagehands, painters, and I love them dearly. It's wonderful. But it's just so funny because we're connected in the union, but it's like once they're done painting, they go home for the day. Or once they do their tech and like they just leave and they don't think about it at all. It's weird to me because it's like, yeah, we all work in the industry and everyone's like, oh, you're so crazy, you work in theater. But these people have like an almost normal job within theater. And it's just such a weird thing because like, it's not a personality clash, but it's just like a totally different understanding of the same industry.
In my early career, I did a lot more scenic painting. It was nice because of exactly what you're saying. It was more reasonable hours. You're getting paid hourly. Some of the places, if you were to work enough hours, and I had places that wanted me to work more hours, like if you worked enough, you'd be able to enroll in their healthcare and like stuff like that. That sounds really nice. But for some reason, I want to be designing things instead.
Well, I just love that document you have, and you showed it to me, I think, a year ago, and I have clearly not implemented it. I still don't do it. And do you know anything about the off-Broadway assistant, like USA worksheet for hours?
I have looked at it in my like thinking about my hourly tracking. If I remember correctly, it's more by show and less by like day and week, which I just sort of like from my mind. Because clearly I do it by show in the end, but most of my work, I'm like the number of hours per show I work doesn't affect what I get paid. Whereas I feel like that sheet is more based on if you're getting paid hourly and trying to track your hours per show. Is that true? That's what it looked like to me when I was looking at it.
Yeah, I can't find it anymore. Somewhere I looked at it and then I can't seem to find it. So now I don't even know what it looks like.
I think in like some Discord group I was talking about it and someone sent me the link.
I'm going to try to find it and put it in the show notes, but I make no promises here. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And again, I will clean that up and put it in the show notes so everyone can look at that, because I think that is such a good habit, even if you don't update it daily or regularly. That certainly makes life easier. But just like at tax time, when I'm going back and being like, where was I out of town? And like, let's just make sure that information is in there so that in 2 years, if I get audited, I'll have the information there.
Yeah.
So I just think that's amazing. And again, it goes back to like, there's not a lot of negotiation necessarily, but when you have the hard data of saying like, this is how many hours I worked, or this is unreasonable, I need to I need a break for myself. I need a vacation in here that I have to build in because that's something that my wife and I have always like. It's been a sticking point for us in our entire marriage is like she will make us take vacation sometimes. The amount of shows I have turned down because we had to go on vacation. And it's like I'm always really unhappy about it. But in the grand scheme of my life, I think it's for my mental health, certainly it's way better. But it's also like good to have because I think we struggle so much taking time for ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's always hard to feel like you deserve to get away. But like reminding yourself that you do and you work more than enough in order to deserve it and have like more than earned it, I think is important to remind yourself when being your own boss, essentially.
All right. So thank you for sharing that spreadsheet. Now I'm going to go back to some of these questions I like to ask. And this one being in your current life, do you have any debts?
I don't. I'm very lucky and I've managed to avoid it.
You don't even have student loans?
No, my parents were very, very amazing. And I don't deserve that.
I mean, a CPA is like someone with crunching the numbers constantly. That's got to be a good thing to have in your life.
Definitely. It's this interesting thing where I almost need to like pry him to teach me the things because certain things it's like almost easier for him to just do. And I'm like, no, I want to like understand what's going on. Even when like we look through like the tax packet that TurboTax makes, I'm like, I feel like a very smart person most of the time. But reading this, I'm like, why did they say all these words? It shouldn't be this many words.
My in-laws, the taxes, you review them, right? They send them to your review, but it's like, it's 100 pages. Who can really like, and I'm not the professional, like, can I really review that? Like, I glance through, but it's really just like pretending because I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, those numbers, that's, the little things I'm seeing seem right. But my in-laws had like their tax money they owed wasn't going out of the account.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out it was like one extra digit had been added on to their banking information or something. And they were like kicking themselves like, oh, we should have known it. We did review it. And I was like, are you kidding? You know how many digits are on that tax return? Like, there's no way you could have like noticed that one.
It's intentionally impossible.
Yeah.
And this might be partially untrue, but I think it's at least partially true. I think in most developed countries, taxes are a much easier thing. Like TurboTax lobbies our government to keep it complicated. So you need to pay for TurboTax in order to possibly do it.
Yeah. And this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but is it? I will say. So the only knowledge I have of that is we've had somebody from France and Russia, and it backs up what you're saying. They're like, oh yeah, it's just a form you fill out and da-da-da.
One of my cousins who works, or my cousin's husband who works in government, he wrote this in one of his books that he has published. So I hope it's true.
I have heard it before. Not the first time I'm hearing that. But what you going to do? All right. So have you ever used a budget?
Not really. I have, and this is partially because I am saving money by living with my parents, but I have not been at a point where I'm like living beyond what I'm making. So it just hasn't felt necessary. And like I've had been able to contribute to my various retirement things. And so like I haven't been like, this is everything I spend this month versus like what I'm making.
I remember one of the early episodes, I think with Wilson Chin, is he just talked about like, I know like how much I have and I know how much I can spend, like just as the whole. And like, I know I have my nut that like of all my expenses. And then I just know am I over or under that. And like, so it's not budgeting per se, but it's like, I always know where I'm at.
And I think in like when I was in college or very shortly after, when it was just sort of smaller quantities of money involved, then I think I was a little like, I paid attention to that a bit more. But in my current life setup, it hasn't felt essential.
And my wife and I are the same way because we're like, we don't live a lavish lifestyle. We have our necessities and that's sort of like all we get. We're not like big purchasers or like things. The vacations are the one thing that we do make a point to go and do. So in that sense, we're spending on that. But we don't budget because it's like all these are necessary. The electricity, necessary. The internet, necessary. Our phones, necessary. I don't know. I'm making an excuse for why we don't budget, but it's like we have to buy the things we have to buy. Like we have to have a car in Missouri.
And like, if you don't need to, what's the need for another spreadsheet in your life?
Exactly. All right, Vincent, what is the best financial thing you've done that others could learn from?
Making the charts we were discussing is something that has been incredibly helpful for me in terms of valuing my hours and my time. I think when I was young and starting out, or just starting out, it was harder for me to value my time and be like, my time has value, and if you are taking it, I need to be aware of that. And just sort of writing down when it's like, even if it's 0.25 hours where we have a phone call, and knowing that I've taken time from other things for this project has been really helpful.
Yeah, and I love it again because like right now, like after we do this, I guess I'll call it an interview, but I'm meeting a director for a show that I will potentially be lighting. And the production manager sent me the script, and I think I've spent 4 hours. I read through the script and took some notes. But it's like I would thought of you because it's like, well, this is already 4, maybe 5 hours that I've put into the show that should go. That if I were tracking the hours, like should go in there as time.
And like for most people, you're being called an independent contractor on their taxes. And like most contractors are sending people an invoice with like, this is the number of labor hours spent on your project. And theater doesn't quite function that way most of the time.
It doesn't, but sometimes I'll do invoices and then I'll add an hour for making the invoice because I'm sitting here having to like do this, and it does take time, and it's working on the project. So it's generic overhead, but also let me just stick it in here as like an actual thing of this happened. I also wanted to say you had listed 1099, if something was a 1099 or not. I think that's very important, especially if anyone's listening and they are starting out, because this seems to be like the biggest bugaboo. You've heard this podcast so many times. I have talked about this W-2 1099. We get it. We understand it. But I forget that when you're starting out, you don't know that 1099 means you haven't paid the taxes on that. You are responsible for those taxes. So something that's really good about your spreadsheet is you have marked which ones are 1099. So that way, if you're really paying attention, you know at the end of the year, like how much you're going to be paying in taxes. Like if you just take our rule of thumb of like 30% of that is going to taxes, then you can just look at each one. Like say your fee was, $3,000 and it's marked 1099. You know that 900 of that has to be saved for taxes. That's just a really, really good thing, is a reminder that those 1099s, knowing which ones they were. And in your spreadsheet, it seems like you were half and half. So it seems like you were on a lot of W-2, which is great.
It's more like 75% 1099. It depends on what section of the spreadsheet you're looking at. But I did count them before this, and it was more like 75.
75% are 1099. So most of your stuff is 1099.
Yeah. One of the things is also like, thank God for my dad, knowing to do estimated taxes, which is just something I truly would have had absolutely no clue existed if I didn't have him. And obviously anyone who listens to your podcast will know that it's a thing. I'm like, how are normal people just supposed to magically know to do it?
But okay, so do you pay quarterly?
Yes, I do.
Okay, see, because I don't.
Yeah.
And I think if you listen, it's like half people do, half people don't. It seems to be where it falls. We've had an accountant tell us like, oh, these are your estimated taxes, but we've just never paid them.
One quarter, 1 year, we just like missed the estimated taxes. And then we got fined for not doing it. It wasn't that much, but it was like for not doing it. And it's like, so you're going to, that's what I don't fully understand. Maybe I'm not saying the words correctly, but.
Well, the way I describe it is I never did it. I never got fined for it. So therefore I never started.
Right.
And I'm afraid if I started, then I would have to do it. which now you can pay digitally, and like I think it'd be easier for me to manage.
Yeah.
But and then when we did the tax episode a while back for tax time, I think one of the CPAs said that you're supposed to pay quarterly if you've owed $1,000 or more in taxes, like at tax time. So then next time, which technically I have, but again, I'm just sticking with, I think I'm doing fine.
If it works, it works.
Vincent, what is something bad something bad financially that you have done that other people should avoid doing?
This was something we were talking about in our various conversations as well, and I was so kicking myself for it because you've literally talked about it on here, was when investing in our IRA, making sure that the funds in it are actually getting invested in something. And I truly thought I was, but it was just the first year I set it up that was actually invested. The subsequent years, I was contributing to it, but they were not getting invested. And I realized that this year. And I was like, oh my gosh, Ethan says this so many times. And I like truly thought from my previous, like, I was like, oh yeah, it is increasing a little bit. So it must be some, but it was just a little bit in the beginning was accruing, but nothing since. So I was furious about that, but glad it's corrected now.
No, I'm so glad you have said this and brought this up because yes, you're somebody I've talked to and I'm like, wow, Vincent is so put together financially. And then you mentioned, oh yeah, by the way, I had invested in the IRA, but it wasn't actually invested. Like it was just sitting in the account, which I will still say that getting money and setting it aside is the most important part of the IRA. And we're going to have an episode soon about the 6K update, like where are the investments that we did, like where have they grown? It's been 4 years now. And the reality is, yes, they've grown, but not as much as you would hope. But the reason is because I'm not adding. So I'm not consistently saving every more each year. Like I'm not putting in more to the investment to let it grow faster and faster and faster. I just bought the thing and I'm letting it sit, which is good. But the real important thing about the IRA is doing it every year. Making sure you're doing that 1,000 every year or 6,000 or whatever, because that's how you add it up over time. Yes, it's important to get in a chunk when you're young or like start as young as possible. That's very important. Time is on your side, but the consistent saving is a huge part that you have to keep doing, like even if it's not a lot. All right, soapbox, I'm getting off it, but back on because episode 93 with projection designer Kate Hebner. That is the first time that we heard of somebody putting money into their Roth IRA and then sitting on it. And I think she checked back like 10 years later and it was like, wait, it hasn't grown. And it was because she hadn't invested the money. So you did the same thing. Thankfully, you caught it sooner. But I do want to say, we now, to dox myself, we have all our stuff in Fidelity, which actually isn't a surprise because they own like most of the world's.
Yeah, mine's are in Fidelity as well.
Yeah, so it's like most people are with Fidelity. So if you had to guess, you probably would have guessed that. Something that's really good that they do is when the money is sitting in cash, like if you put it aside and haven't invested it, they put it into like bonds or something. And so it does increase like 1 or 2%.
Yes, that's what I was seeing. And why I was like, it's invested in something. I did something, but it wasn't the right thing.
It's invested in cash, like cash bonds or something. So I will say that it's really good that they do that. And I appreciate that so much because there have been so many times where in the accounts, I've forgotten, like I put the chunk in, but then like a week goes by because it takes 3 days or 5 days to clear. And so then I forget about it. And then the next time I log in, like 6 months later, I'll be like, oh, I never actually like did the investing thing. So props to them for doing that little bit. But let's just say it again and just reiterate that if you have an IRA set up and you're putting money into it, just make sure it's getting auto invested. And if it's not getting auto invested, actually invest it. And what we mean by that is, yes, have it in the brokerage account or the retirement account, but then you actually have to buy a stock or a bond or an ETF or a mutual fund, or I think even crypto is maybe an option now. Like you actually have to purchase a thing. And then you're no longer in cash, you're in this business. And that business hopefully will grow and grow with the stock market and all that.
And like this year, just because I wasn't sure exactly what I was doing wrong, or if I was doing something wrong, I called them because I just wasn't sure exactly what the right thing to do was. And I wish it was just like a big green button as soon as you put it in, like invest in something. But you have to like go to trade and then look at the things and have the code you want.
Yeah, it's called trading. That's true. It doesn't say invest. And so you got to put in your chunk of money. You got to wait 3 to 5 days, let it clear. Then it shows up as in cash. And then that's how much cash you have to buy, etc. And then you have to click on trade and pick the thing. And when in doubt, if you don't know what to invest in, I would never give financial advice. But what we do is just the S&P 500 index. So I think it's FXAIX is the Fidelity version. It's their like lowest cost option for buying the S&P 500. I haven't memorized because like that's just where we put everything.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same one. And I'm honestly, the reason why I thought to ask about it is because of listening to this podcast. So thank you for that, Ethan.
No, I'm so glad. And so if you're listening and you're like, I need to go check to see if I'm invested. If I were you and you find out like, oh, I'm not invested, I would, while I'm still in there in Fidelity or wherever, I would just take all your cash, put it into FXAIX or whatever low cost index fund, and then know that you can sleep soundly knowing that it's invested. And then you can take time and research and figure out, what do I actually want to invest in? What are my actual long-term goals? Talk to somebody who knows, a financial professional who knows what you're doing. And then once you get that answer, then go back in and sort of reallocate. But at least in the meantime, just get it into the market and let the market do its thing.
And like investing in that sort of index fund feels like an easy way of doing it. I know some of the other methods of investing are a little bit more like hands-on, perhaps. And I don't feel like I would excel in that sort of thing. And putting it in an index fund, an S&P 500 index fund that I know is going to go with the market, it feels very comforting.
Yeah. And most of the time it's fine unless president by the name of Donald Trump gets in office and then wreaks havoc. But I will say, I actually do want to bring this up, that he has done all this crazy stuff with the market with the tariff wars, but I feel like it's certainly lower than it was when he took office, but it has rebounded quite a bit. So even as crazy as like this just absurdity is, where it's almost like he's just trying to make rich people more money, but even with all of this, it's still like, I'm not terribly upset, like looking at the market, knowing that like this will iron itself out. And even so, like, yes, we're down, but like it's not like 100% down. It's not 50% down. It's not, even though it feels like it's absolutely crazy right now, just as the same with COVID, like it felt so crazy right then. But then with COVID, it was like within months, it was sort of like back where it needed to be.
Well, even just like in the past month since I've corrected the investment of my IRA, seeing like the difference in the angle of the line is just like, why wasn't I doing this for the past few years? It's nice to see.
Well, I'm so glad that you're back on track, and I'm so glad. How many years were you not invested?
I want to say it was 4 years or 5, something like that. Because initially, when I first set up this stuff, we just did like a normal traditional IRA. Now I invest into a SEP IRA, which like is for small business stuff. It's just like a slightly different account, which is why it's not been like the entire 7 years since I graduated.
Yep. Got it. All right. Well, I'm so glad that you have that sorted out. And if anybody's listening and you think you're good and you've set it up, just go back and check. Take a couple of minutes, log in, figure out what the login is, and just check so that we can avoid this. Because this is the second person. We've definitely had more, but these are the two. There's at least you're the second person that we know for sure put the money in the account in the IRA, which was great, but then didn't invest it. And it's such a simple, easy thing. So just don't let this happen to you.
Yes, definitely.
And I just want to point out that, yes, it was 4 years or potentially 7, however many it was for you, but you're living, you're breathing, you're living a good life. Things are good. You're still in good shape.
Yes. And I have plenty more years till I'm retired.
All right. So, Vincent, I'm going to skip around some of these questions because I realize we're starting to run out of time. Working with fellow designers or assistants, if you ever do you talk about pay or negotiate pay with anyone else?
I've been trying to initialize conversations with the people I'm most close to on the team whenever I can. That's often the lighting designer, just because that's the person I work the most with. And just see how either like the difference in what we're getting paid or whether it's the same. And like a lot of these places, they're their own ME. Some places I'm building stuff myself. Some places I'm paying stuff myself. It really depends on the organization. So that I definitely try to have that conversation and there's like an organic moment for it to happen. And then as far as assistant work goes, I don't have assistants that often, but I do try and advocate for them to get like a reasonable wage. Like, one place was trying to hire people in New York City for $18 an hour. And I'm like, we're not going to get anyone doing that. So,
yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. I know the advocate, I do advocate, but I only advocate like so much. Like I feel like I never get what I want. So many times I end up like managing the hours of the assistants because I'm just like, yes, I know you're willing to do all this, but I'm not willing to have you do it.
I had someone helping me like, I don't know, a year ago. And theater isn't his full-time job, but he's done some construction and stuff for various like local theaters. And I was like, you need to give them your hours so they pay you. And he was like, oh, like it doesn't matter. And I was, yes, it does. I will not ask you to help me again if you do not make sure they pay you.
Absolutely. Which job of yours has been the most well compensated?
I think is a high school job that they pay me about $5,000 to design, build, paint. So I'm sort of like doing multiple people's jobs, but feel fairly compensated for that quantity of work.
Do you have an entity or corporation or anything, or are you just a sole proprietor?
I don't. I've considered it mostly for the liability stuff, but I do have liability insurance, so I feel like that sort of helps bridge that gap, but I have not set it up yet.
Okay. So you have liability insurance for you yourself yeah, I guess you.
Yes. Yeah. It's for me as an individual. Because I mostly wanted it for the carpentry work that I do, just because that seems like where the liability is the most.
And how difficult was that for you to get? And who is your provider, if I may ask?
It's Liberty Mutual. It was a little confusing. Like, I think I first called USAA because my mom's a vet. And they sort of just like transferred my call and then someone else transferred my call. And like every time I would have to give everything I just said, like all of my information and everyone was like, oh, I don't really think we have that sort of coverage for this sort of profession. But eventually I found this and I haven't needed it yet. And hopefully I never do.
Okay. I say that just because we did a whole episode on it. And it's the hot mess. But in that episode, I listed like a lot of the providers. I think Liberty Mutual actually was on there.
This might be a random weird fact, but specifically in it, it says this doesn't apply. I think it says it doesn't apply to construction projects. And I was like, I do build things. Will it cover the things I build? And they were like, well, yes, you're building sets. You're not building houses. Like that covers it. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? It says, but she said yes multiple times.
That makes sense. That to me, I can understand it in the sense that it's like a temporary structure. Because there are certain times we put up lighting rigs that look permanent, but it's like technically you can take it down. So therefore it's not like real. Okay. It was episode 136 about liability insurance with Phil Powers and Bill Rios. So if anybody curious about that or wants that list of providers. Vincent, it sounds like you file your own taxes. Is that true?
I mean, my dad files my taxes, but he asks me for information. And every year I'm like, if you want to teach me how to do more of it, I will. And he has yet to take me up on that offer.
Well, because you're not an independent, right? Even though you're living at home, but you file taxes completely separately.
Yeah, yes. I file as an individual, not.
So, but potentially, okay. So, yeah, next year you'd be like, Dad, I'm going to sit with you. I'm just going to sit with you right in front of this TurboTax for however many hours this is going to take.
And my dad does it for the four of us in my family, but mine are always the last ones because they take the longest and involve, 3 or 4 states and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah. All right. We've talked about IRAs or SEP IRA. Do you have any retirement plan? Do you have any other parts to it?
One other is I have part of a savings plan through Milliman from my pandemic job because that was a full-time work. It's a small amount because I was there for 2 years, but it was enough to be vested. It's not like the maximum amount it could be if I had worked like 6 years or something. I don't.
Of course. But
That's
cool.
one of the things I don't fully understand, but I know is there.
Amazing. Cool. Yeah, that's on my list because I worked at ASU and I thought I could never pull that money out. Like it was stuck in that because I have like 3,000 or something from the year I taught there. And it's like, I just assumed it was stuck there, but I've read recently that I think you can like transfer out or something like once you haven't worked there for such amount of time. But that's on my list because I was just reading a thing that was like, when people retire, one of the craziest things is how much money they lose because they lost track of like their retirement fund somewhere. And then we like it actually, it's like some billion amount of dollars is people had forgotten accounts. So that's like in the back of my mind of like, okay, at some point I got to get that ASU money just over, even though it's not a lot, I just need to get it over. So then I never have to worry about it ever again.
That's also on my to-do list to transfer it from that account to my general stuff. But the one time I like tried to look into it, it didn't work on the first login attempt. And I was like, I don't have time for this right now. But someday it is on my list.
Okay, so I don't know if you saw this section. It's like new and I haven't really asked everybody yet. So I don't even know if an episode exists where we actually got this one out. But this is Asia Jackson has pushed this sort of segment that I've failed at getting here. But it's called Real Numbers. And what is the actual fee you got on a recent project?
Just because I have a pretty wide range, I wrote down like 3 that sort of like show the range. One was 3,500, 2,500, and one was 1,750. So like, obviously each of those numbers is like a different scale of work. The 3,500, I was definitely like building and painting and designing. The 2,500 was designing and like sort of helping get the finishing thing done when other people didn't. And then the 1,750 was like a much smaller like community theater project where the space is small and like the budget's like $1,500. So the scale of what we can do is very limited. And like for those sorts of smaller fee projects, I try to be very good about being like, this is the number of hours or days I'm allowing myself to work on it so that it still feels like I'm making appropriate money for my life and job. I think that's also really helpful in tracking hours to know exactly where I am mid-project.
This has been the struggle with like, I think designers and money is like, it's so ethereal, but it's like when you're tracking the hours, it's like, no, there's an actual, regardless of what's happening in that hour, regardless of what part of the process it is, like it's an actual hour that people understand the quantity of an hour. And then when you add those hours up. So I think that spreadsheet definitely helps with like people understand it. Like when you say, I can't work more than 60 hours on this project because, and then everyone agrees. Everyone's like, yeah, that would be ridiculous for you to work that amount of money, time.
One of the things I hate is when people talk about, oh, it'd be so depressing if I kept track of my hours. And I'm just like, but you need to, and the theater should know that if they're doing it to you.
Well, I appreciate that about Isabella mentioning the inequity between like a stagehand weekly wages because they're hourly versus a designer. And it's just a little ludicrous. Like for the designer, okay, but for the assistant or somebody else, like it becomes a little ludicrous. And I only saying the designer, it sort of makes sense. Like when you get to Broadway and you get like a really big fee and it sort of justifies and I understand and all that. But like the assistants and the associates on the design side versus the electrician side, it's like there's no protection for working a bazillion hours. And so I was glad that she said it, and I'm glad you're saying like, oh, don't, because that was the age-old wisdom I grew up with, was all the designers said, don't figure out your hourly. And what they really meant was everyone has figured it out, and it says like $1.50 or $2 an hour. And our brain can't cope with that because it's so unequal, and you just don't even know, and it just does not compute in the brain. And so I'm glad you're saying it, because it's like, yeah, we do need to address the fact that if it is $1.50, if it is and we had our pay negotiation episode with all the designers and their agents, and I think Daniela Hart, a sound designer, was saying like, we just try to fight for at least $25, or maybe it was 30 or 35, but it's like we figure out how many hours we're going to be working on the project, and we just want that minimum to be $25. And if it's more, we're super happy, but we at least don't want to go below that. And so I think that falls in line with, we do need to figure out how many hours we're putting into it.
Yeah. And like, if I'm in a project and sometimes it's like, will I spend one extra day painting this, or will I like do the quick painting version of it? Sometimes I do like add up the hours I've worked so far and know that I'm going to be sitting in tech for approximately this many, and know that I have about this many more I should put into this project based on what they're paying me.
And maybe I struggle with it too, because as a lighting designer, I can do that. Like, I can make a really good complicated cue or not. Like, I could just walk away from the show at any point, and technically it's lit, Now, depending, I will stick around for another week or two, or blah, 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 and do all this extra work. But like, I technically, like, the lights turn on and the cues make sense.
Yes.
So maybe that's part of my struggle too. I don't know why I'm coming up with excuses for not tracking my hours. Shame on you, Ethan. You should do it. Was there anything in those contracts you listed, anything else that you needed to negotiate?
No, none of them involve things like fees or additional weekly compensation, like per diem, that sort of thing. That's all local. I have a upcoming project where like they're providing housing and airfare and that sort of thing. I have a summer stock gig that I do. I've done like 6 shows there, something like that, where they provide meals as well as housing and transportation, which is like amazing.
I know. I'm always so happy when there's meals provided. So happy.
Especially because when you're in these places where you don't have time to cook, do you want to have to worry about what the food is?
Yeah, exactly. And I also, rarely do I ever complain about it, because actually I've never complained about it, because like, you'll show up and the actors have already been there for 3 weeks or something, and they're like sick of it. And I'm like, well, I'm only here for a week or two. And so a week or two of this food is fine by me.
Yep. I know that exact feeling.
Um, all right. So let's wrap up here. Regarding finances and business side of this career, what advice would you give somebody who's just getting out of college now, or maybe they didn't go to college and they're just starting to get into this career? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think learning how to value your time as early as possible is super duper important. And like, and we've said it 5 times, but keeping track of your hours, I think, is so helpful in order to realize the value of your time and not just giving it away for free, or like chipping away from your fee, spending hours doing things maybe you shouldn't do. And I think recent years with like Zoom production meetings have been so helpful with that, where you're not like wasting 2 hours commuting or whatever it is to a 30-minute meeting. But I did so much of that, where I would come in from New Jersey to the city early in my career for like a meeting that's shorter than my commute time. And like, obviously I was doing that partially because I was saving money by living in New Jersey. But I think knowing the value of what you bring to the table is just the most important thing. And obviously, like, investing your IRA is also a good thing to do.
I love that. Yeah. If you're just starting out, I would say open an IRA and automate something into that. Like, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And it seems like we have hammered on the hours, tracking the hours so much, but it is such an important thing because it's such a simple thing. And it's one of those actual tangible things that we can use to advocate for ourselves. So it is just wildly, wildly important. So yeah. So thank you for obsessing over it for this hour.
My pleasure. I obsess over it for many more hours in my life outside of this.
Vincent, where can people connect with you and who do you want to connect with you?
My Instagram is probably the easiest way for direct communication with me. It's at Vincent Gunn Design.
Gun with two N's.
Yes, Gunn with two N's. You can also go through my website, which is just vincentgunn.com. There's a contact sheet there and more work and stuff. One group of people I'd be really curious to hear from is people who design in the educational theater sphere, just because I only really interact with the people I directly work with. And I'd be so curious to hear about like the finances of how your life and how you structure your business. And, you know, people at all levels who are interested in anything we've talked about today or interested in set designers and what we do. I'd be happy to speak with really anyone. So reach out.
And I'm just asking because you do a lot of educational work, but you're not an academic teacher or anything like that. Do you ever consider going to USITT or is
I've actually never been there. It's something I think could be really interesting especially when I work at like summer stocks. I feel like that's something people always talk about because I would meet people from like various colleges. But like, well, I went to Fordham University in the city. We never went to any sort of conference like that. I think could be fun, but I haven't yet to.
Yeah, you're like, we are the pinnacle. We're in the pinnacle of the theater in the United States. We don't need to go to USITT. I'm making it up, putting words in Fordham's mouth.
I mean, they might say that, but
yeah. Well, this year I had, and maybe it's because I spent a year in academia, so maybe I'm just more connected to it a little bit. But this year, 3 people sort of messaged me or texted me, some that I knew, some that I didn't know, and said, "Oh, we mentioned artistic finance at USITT. You should do a session or something like this." But they also there are other people that are sort of doing similar work as artistic finance, like going. Now I'm suddenly like I've always sort of dismissed USITT as like this. I don't know, like academia. It's like it's an extension of academia, and I've always sort of been like, eh. But now I'm like, you know what? There are some really good sessions and education happening there. So now I'm a little curious about going.
yeah. And I mean, I think, especially at the college level, I think the more artistic finance stuff can be implemented, like the better. Towards the end of my senior year, there was like one day where people came in and spoke to us about business stuff. But like, it was one day and truthfully, I don't remember what. And like, obviously it's good and well intentioned, but I feel like it should be a semester long class about running your business as an artist.
Well, and I'm talking with somebody. I'm not going to go next year, but somebody's putting a session together, and they asked me to be part of it. And I said, I'm not going to come, but just because it's expensive and all that to go. But I was like, but I do have some thoughts because it's like a basic of finances, and like something we've covered today is like 1099. Like just explaining that, like just getting like there's just a few simple concepts that everybody gets hung up on, and it's like just cover those, at least cover those in that hour because there's so much to cover. So it's like, just make sure people are saving for retirement and know that they have to pay taxes on that 1099. And that's it. Like, if you take that away from an hour, like you're doing good.
And I think just being like a little organized and knowing that the government doesn't just like tell you what you owe. You need to have the documentation of what you've done, especially so you can track down or like report things that don't send you a 1099.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, if you don't get sent that, you still have to report it. Yeah, that's a good point. Like if we go back to our tax episode, there I have links to like my spreadsheet that I use for taxes, but it's like the things that you need to keep track of aren't that complicated. And so you just, like you're saying, just need to be a little organized so that you then have the answers for tax time. And you're like, oh, I totally understand this. And then once you do it once, you know for the rest of time.
100%.
Cool. All right, Vincent. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. And thank you for reaching out on LinkedIn and all the back and forth that we had. And I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this week's episode. My takeaways are Vincent never had exorbitant spending habits. That fits right in with another common theme on this show, which is keeping overhead low. That is one of the keys that helps career longevity in theater. The big thing we talked about, which is making this spreadsheet and tracking hours, Vincent pointed out that invoices have labor numbers and hours spent per project, and we can do it too, just to normalize this hour understanding and, more importantly, to do it for ourselves. And one of the good reasons for doing it for ourselves is that on smaller budget things, he mentioned tracking hours or giving himself a number of hours before he then calls the project complete. There's no boss that we have that sort of tells us how much time to put into each project, so that is totally up to us. And what a great way to track it and remind it for ourselves if we just input it into our Notes app or we input it into our Google Doc every day. It seems like another thing we have to keep track of, but we're already keeping track of so much. Just find a way to add it into the daily routine. We mentioned the spreadsheet during the show. If you watch the video version of this on YouTube, you will see Vincent walking through it. You can also find a link to the Google Doc template in the show notes, which again is at artisticfinance.com/190. And we're certainly happy if any Excel whiz is listening and wants to take a stab at making it prettier. If anyone does that and gets it back to me, I will update the link to the prettier version. And that big one, another big one, which is investing the money in the IRA. And I want to add to this the importance of automating payments. Don't leave it up to yourself to put in those chunks once a year or twice a year or 3 times a year or at tax time. Don't count on that. Do automate just a little bit so that way you don't have to think about it all the time and you can sleep knowing that you are putting some money into a retirement account for yourself. Vincent mentioned feeling comfortable putting investments into index funds that track the market or track industries as a whole. And that's because he doesn't want to be watching or worrying about his retirement account. And that's a way that he can just know he's with the market. Liability insurance. We did 2 episodes about this. One was for lighting designers and lighting people, and that was show 136, which you can find at artisticfinance.com/136. We also talked about liability insurance for circus performers, which weirdly enough, that same company we talked to actually covers some DJs and lighting type people. But that was show 141. So you can find that at artisticfinance.com/141. We talked a little bit about USITT, and that just got me thinking about the financial basics of what do people need to know. So right now, I'm just spitballing here, but I'm going to write this down, which is 1, save for retirement. 2, no 1099 income, and that means you have to be saving 30% to pay for taxes at the end of the year. And then with that, be organized with your taxes and your receipts. So even if somebody else is going to be filing taxes, you still need to do it. Now, the government isn't going to tell you necessarily exactly what they need and how you should organize it. And there will certainly be time that companies don't send tax documents, but you're not going to know that they're not going to send them until tax time, at which point it sort of becomes too late. So that is why it's important to track for yourself how much you got paid from each job. And finally, learning how to value your time. Now, I'm going to add to this, which is don't be afraid to tell people. So if you think you're wasting your time going to a meeting or something like that, obviously you want to be doing your job and you want to be a team player, but let people know if you think something's not worth your time or you need to be doing something elsewhere that's more important. And those people can confirm that, no, you really do need to make this meeting, or they'll say, okay, that's cool. But you have to decide for yourself where you are spending your time. And speaking of that, I made a blunder about the value of my time the same day that I interviewed Vincent. So if you listened closely during the interview, I mentioned that I met with the director, or I was going to. Now, the director is super cool, but they are going in a different direction for the show, aka I was rejected as the lighting designer. Now, yes, that stings and I have emotional reactions to that rejection, but it's totally okay. There's 500 logical reasons why I didn't get the gig, but I'm sharing it because I spent 4 hours reading the script and another hour meeting with the director, all for nothing to come of it. So that's 5 hours. Now, part of this is that I didn't have all the information. It was a cold reach out from the production manager asking me to meet with the director, and then they sent me a script. Now, our design union, USA 829, makes it clear that no work should be done before signing a contract. However, in my brain, how can you meet with a director and speak about the script if you haven't read it? Now, I got into the meeting, and it turns out the director hadn't even read the script or hadn't read it very closely. And so it was just added to all the things that were wrong with the situation. But I should have asked a little bit more. I was just going with the flow, doing what I naturally do. But had I gotten a little clarification, maybe I could have saved myself some time. Now, I bring this up because, yes, it was a waste of my time, but I'm not bitter about it because this is just a part of the business. But I do want to bring it up because you can probably relate, one, to not getting the design gig after talking with the director, and two, spending time and effort on something that turns into nothing. And what I'm going to take away from this is probably on the next meeting like this that I do, I'm not going to read the script, which could backfire on me, but it's just, I'm going to make up for this time then. Okay, I know it doesn't work like that. All right, that is it for this week's episode. Before we wrap up completely, I do want to make an appeal, and that is if you have it in your ability to support this show financially, do consider joining up as a Patreon patron. You can pledge monthly or yearly support, and whatever tier you join at, you will get an ad-free podcast feed. Now, if you're unable or unwilling to join on Patreon, I totally understand and I appreciate you nonetheless. And there are still things that you could do to help me out. And one is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, leave a rating and review, specifically on Apple Podcasts would be the best. And then if you could, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast on your podcast app and enable auto downloads. So that way, if you miss an episode or you decide not to listen to one, we will still get the download number, which will include ads. And for every 6 ads, we get a penny. And something that really helps me out is that if you follow the podcast on your podcast app or subscribe to it and you enable auto downloads, that way, if you miss an episode or you decide to skip one, we will still get the download number, which will still play the ads somehow. And for every 6 ads, we potentially get a penny. So if you can do that or are willing to do that, it is much appreciated. And the final thing would be follow us on YouTube. So that way we can get to 1,000 subscribers there, which would allow us to enable ads. All right, enough of my appeals to you. The dad joke to end the episode, and I actually have 2. Now, the dad joke to end the episode, and I have 2 because the one I thought of wasn't that great, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway, and that is, when you're working on a project, you're going to figure out who the set designer is because they're going to forget to clock in, forget to clock out, and forget what day it is. But they're going to remember the exact offstage storage spot of every scenic element from the show that they did 5 years ago. All right, that was as good as I could come up with, but I asked ChatGPT to give me a better one, and it did not deliver, but it did give me this weird one that for some reason I really like. So we'll wrap the show with this one. The set designer's prayer. Give us this day our daily per diem, and forgive us our unlogged hours, as we forgive those who move platforms without asking. That's it for today. Until next time, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance, where we interview successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire the creative community. To access our show notes and resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.